My younger sister stole my fiancé. I'm done being the kind older sister. I stand my ground now. The rain was soft when she walked into the garden, but her heart thundered. Aralyn never liked eavesdropping. She never wanted to become the kind of woman who stood in shadows, watching a story unfold without her. But life had a cruel way of making even the gentlest people desperate. She hadn't meant to follow them. She only noticed that her sister, Leora, had slipped away from the engagement party, her engagement party, and that her fiancé, Lord Cassian Vale, had disappeared not long after. She told herself she was overthinking it. But still, her steps carried her down the marble corridor, across the servants' path, and out into the garden where the lantern still glowed from the celebration. That's when she saw them. Leora's hands on his chest, Cassian's fingers tucked beneath her chin. The kiss. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't brief. It wasn't something she could pretend hadn't happened. Aralyn didn't move. Not at first. She watched as her sister, her sweet, perfect, beloved younger sister, clutched the man Aralyn had been betrothed to for the past year. "I'm sorry," Cassian said, breathless when he finally saw her. "Aralyn, You don't have to explain," she replied, voice too calm for the crack in her chest. "I understand perfectly." Leora turned, guilt painting her perfect face like a stolen portrait. "Aralyn, please," she whispered. "You've always been so good to me. I didn't mean for this to happen." That was the moment something inside Aralyn broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but like a quiet snap of a thread that had been holding her together. Always so good to me, always giving, always sacrificing. Since the moment their mother died, Aralyn had been the one to make things easier. She gave up her studies when Leora was too lonely. She gave up her time, her passions, her quiet evenings. And now, she was expected to give up her fiancé too? She turned without a word and walked back inside, her steps light, her mind suddenly clearer than it had been in years. That night she packed a small bag. Not much, just what she needed. She left a letter on her father's desk. "I have spent my life being the kind daughter, the giving sister, the obedient bride. But I have decided to stop being kind to those who confuse my love with permission to hurt me. I am leaving. Do not look for me." And just like that, Aralyn left her home, her reputation, her family, her silence. She didn't run away blindly. Aralyn had planned her exit for longer than she admitted to herself. A quiet yearning for freedom had lived beneath her skin for years. She just hadn't realized it until that moment in the garden. She traveled 2 towns north, toward a village near the mountains. A friend from her academy days, a baron's daughter turned librarian, had sent her a letter some months before, asking for help in managing the estate's records. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't noble, but it was hers. A week passed, then 2, and then came the letter. Not from her father, not from her sister, but from a man named Noel Corvin, the Duke of the Ironhold, a territory near the warfront, known for its beasts, snow, and isolation. The man was infamous for his cold demeanor, quiet brilliance, and refusal to attend any social function unless war demanded it. The letter was simple, direct. "I heard you are no longer engaged. I require a marriage contract. I am not offering love, only protection. In return, you will have my name, my resources, and my distance. 3 years. Then you are free." Aralyn read the letter twice, then a third time, and she laughed, because the timing was absurd, because the offer was insane, because deep down, it was exactly what she needed. And for the first time since she left, she wrote a reply with trembling hands and a heart full of wild, reckless hope. "I accept." The Ironhold was nothing like the capital. There were no marble courtyards, no golden chandeliers, no simpering nobles whispering behind fluttering fans. The air itself was different, colder, cleaner, almost brutal in its honesty. Aralyn stepped out of the carriage onto snow-covered stone, her boots sinking slightly with each step. The wind bit through her coat, but she didn't shiver. Not outwardly. She had made her choice. A butler in thick wool greeted her without a bow. The Duke is waiting. No flowery speeches. No questions. Just like the letter. Inside the fortress-like estate, warmth came from a series of heavy fireplaces and practical furs. Tapestries lined the walls, but none bore her family crest. Nothing here was delicate. Everything was built to endure. They led her to a private study. When the door opened, he didn't stand. He didn't bow. He simply looked up from a desk covered in maps and signed reports, as if she were another logistical problem to solve. Noel Corvin, the Duke of the North, and soon, her husband. He was younger than the rumors had led her to believe. Late 20s, perhaps. Sharp-featured, pale skin, dark hair, trimmed short, eyes like frozen river stone. He studied her the way a soldier studies terrain. Carefully, clinically, completely. "You came," he said. "I accepted," she replied, lifting her chin. "I don't do that lightly." He nodded once. "I respect that." A pause stretched between them. Aralyn wanted to ask if he regretted writing the letter. If this whole thing was a test. If he expected her to run. But instead, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Let's make it official." The terms. The contract was written in his hand. Neat, sparse, unemotional, 3 years. No expectations of affection. Each party may live independently within the estate. At the end of the term, a quiet, amicable divorce. All benefits and titles provided to Aralyn will remain hers. In return, she will attend required events and bear the title of Duchess. It was fair. Brutally so. Noel slid a pen across the desk. "I don't believe in surprises," he said. "I don't believe in being controlled," she answered. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but not as cold as before. "I think this will work," he said quietly. She signed. So did he. And just like that, Lady Aralyn Vale became Duchess Aralyn Corvin. By contract, not by love. The wedding. There was no grand affair, no ball, no guests, just 2 witnesses, a priest, and a ring as simple as the snow falling outside. Aralyn wore dark blue, not white. Noel wore black. They didn't kiss. They didn't even touch. And yet, as she stood beside him in the chapel built into the northern cliffs, she felt something strange stir in her chest. Peace. Not romance, not excitement, but peace. She hadn't chosen him for love. He hadn't chosen her for softness, but in that quiet, wintry ceremony, she realized that sometimes safety was a form of love. And freedom? It could be found in the most unexpected places. The title of Duchess sat strangely on Aralyn's shoulders. She wore it like she wore the heavy winter cloak they gave her upon arrival, not out of pride, but necessity, protection, survival. The servants of Ironhold Castle didn't bow or offer honeyed words like those in the capital, but they also didn't glare at her behind fans or whisper cruelly behind her back. Here, things were simpler, colder, yes, but strangely cleaner. It was the first time in her life that she wasn't expected to play a role. She could simply exist. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying freedom of all. The Duke's distant Noel Corvin, the Duke of the North, was true to his word. He gave her space, more than space, silence. Days passed with only brief glimpses of him. At the War Council chamber she wasn't allowed into, across the snowy training grounds where he sparred with soldiers, and sometimes at dinner, where they shared the same table, but not conversation. He didn't speak unless necessary. He didn't ask questions, and he never once looked at her the way other men had, like a pawn to be used, a symbol to be judged, or a burden to be tolerated. In a way, that was more unnerving than cruelty. Because she couldn't hate him, and hate had been such a familiar shield. The unexpected kindness. It started with the greenhouse, a small, half-frozen structure tucked behind the western wing. No one had mentioned it, but Aralyn found it on a walk one morning. Her fingers numb from the cold, her breath visible in the air. She pushed open the creaking door and was met with warmth, humidity, life. Inside, despite the snow outside, small flowers bloomed. Herbs clung to planters. Vines reached for the frost-kissed windows. It wasn't beautiful, not in the polished, symmetrical way she was used to, but it was real. A place that had been cared for. There was a note on the bench, written in neat, familiar handwriting. For when the cold is too loud. N. She stared at the paper, unmoving, for nearly 5 minutes. Noel had left her this. A sanctuary, a quiet gift, with no expectation of thanks. She didn't know what to do with that. So she sat in the greenhouse for hours, hands wrapped around a cup of spiced tea, watching a stubborn violet bloom despite the world outside. Whispers in the north winter dragged on. Storms howled against the stone walls. Snow buried the roads. The people of the north endured it all with the same quiet strength that their duke possessed. And Aralyn began to see them, not as subjects, but as people. She visited the village for the first time on the duke's supply rounds, and the children didn't fear her. The blacksmith's wife gave her sweetbread. An old man showed her how to stitch heavier cloaks. A young girl shyly offered her a painted stone for luck. She, the former pawn of court politics, the woman scorned by her own blood, was being treated like something human. And in their eyes, she didn't see pity. She saw hope. It broke her and rebuilt her, piece by piece. A new routine. She found herself waking earlier, walking further. She began reading old war reports, understanding why the North was called the kingdom's backbone. She helped with winter food plans. She repaired cloaks for soldiers. She brought books to the ill and tea to the lonely. And every once in a while, she saw him. Noel. Always from a distance, always quiet. But she began to notice the way his eyes lingered on her a little longer each day. He'd nod when she passed, almost imperceptibly. One evening, returning from the village, she found another note tucked into the edge of her chamber door. "You're doing well. They've started smiling again. That's because of you." No name, no signature, but she knew. And for the first time since she signed the marriage contract, Aralyn smiled, not out of politeness or obligation, but because she wanted to. The invitation arrived sealed with gold wax. Aralyn knew the crest before she even opened it. Her sister's new household, the one she'd built on Aralyn's ashes. The winter gala, an annual court event, all silk and chandeliers, held in the very palace where she had once stood as nothing more than her sister's shadow. She folded the letter slowly. "Do we have to go?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes." Noel's voice was even, but his eyes held a flicker of something darker. "If we refuse, it will be read as weakness. The North cannot afford rumors of weakness." And so she went. The return to the stage. The gala glimmered with false warmth. Candles burned in golden sconces. Strings of silver tinsel looped across marble pillars. Laughter rippled like the surface of a pond, bright on top, murky beneath. Aralyn stood beside Noel at the entrance, her gown a deep winter blue that caught the light like midnight water. People stared, whispered. Her presence as the new Duchess of the North had already become a subject of speculation, but she held her chin high. She had survived far worse than whispers. Then she saw them. Rael, her younger sister, dressed in cream satin, a ribbon of pearls at her throat, looking exactly as fragile and angelic as she always had when there was an audience. And beside her, him. The man who had once been Aralyn's fiancé, now standing with a drink in his hand, smiling with the easy charm that had once fooled her completely. For a heartbeat, Aralyn couldn't move. The chandelier light fractured on the polished floor, her breath caught in her chest, and for a moment she was back in that old life. Obedient, overlooked, disposable. Then Noel's hand brushed against her elbow. A small, steady weight, enough to anchor her. "Shall we?" he murmured. "Yes," she said, and walked forward. The coquette's play Riel was the first to speak. "Oh, sister," she cried, gliding toward Aralyn with a practiced tremor in her voice. "I didn't expect to see you here. You look so changed." "Do I?" Aralyn said coolly. "Perhaps I finally learned how to stop giving away what was mine." Riel's smile faltered for half a breath before recovering. "Oh, Aralyn," she said softly, loud enough for nearby ears. "I've missed you. You left so suddenly. Father was devastated, you know." A murmur of sympathy spread among the onlookers, exactly as she intended. Noel said nothing, simply watching with that unreadable expression that had unnerved generals. Riel's eyes flicked toward him. She shifted her posture, her voice, her entire presence like a snake changing skins. "And this must be your husband, the Duke of the North." She let the title roll off her tongue like an invitation. "You're even more handsome than the rumors." "Duke Corvin," Noel said evenly, bowing his head a fraction. His tone held no warmth. Riel moved closer, touching her own hair in a gesture she knew men found attractive. "Aralyn was always so shy. I do hope she's been enough for you in the cold north." Her voice dipped into a soft laugh, just loud enough to humiliate. Aralyn felt the blood rise in her cheeks, but not with shame. Not anymore. She had expected this. She had prepared. "Noel," she said lightly, turning to him. "This is my sister Riel, the one who taught me everything I know about self-sacrifice." He looked at her, then at Riel. Slowly, deliberately, his mouth curved into the faintest ghost of a smile. But it was not a smile of interest. It was a soldier's smile, a warning. "I've heard of you," he said to Riel. "Your reputation precedes you." Her eyes brightened with a false modesty. "Oh? All good things, I hope." "Not exactly," Noel replied, his voice polite but razor-sharp. The people around them stilled. Someone pretended to cough. Riel blinked, thrown off script for the first time in her life. The attempted theft. Later, when Noel stepped aside to speak with a northern delegate, Riel cornered Aralyn near the grand staircase. "You don't deserve him," she hissed, the sweetness stripped from her voice. "You think wearing a fancy dress makes you his equal? You're still the same pathetic sister who gave up everything for me." Aralyn tilted her head, her eyes calm. "Yes," she said. "And look where that got me." "You won't keep him," Riel whispered. "Men like that don't stay with women like you, they get bored." "Do they?" Aralyn asked softly. "Then perhaps you should try your luck." And Riel did. When the music swelled and the crowd drifted to the dance floor, she approached Noel like a predator dressed as prey. She touched his arm, leaning close, her lips curving in a whisper meant only for him. But Noel stepped back. Not rudely, not theatrically, just enough to make it clear. "I'm not interested," he said quietly, "and you should not mistake my patience for anything else." He walked past her, straight to Aralyn's side. Before the entire court, before the man who had once been her fiancé, before every whispering noble, Noel Corvin took his wife's hand and said, "Shall we dance?" The hall went silent. Aralyn smiled, a real smile, sharp as sunlight on ice. "Yes," she said, and they stepped onto the floor together. The gala had ended, but the ripples it sent through the capital had just begun. By the next morning, every salon, drawing room, and noble tea table echoed with the same stunned murmurs. "Did you see how the Duke of the North defended his wife?" Riel's charm didn't work for once. Maybe Aralyn isn't just the quiet older sister after all. The capital's cruelest mouths now spoke Aralyn's name with a strange mix of curiosity and caution. After all, it wasn't every day that a woman so publicly cast off by her own family stood radiant beside the most feared man in the empire. And Noel? He had become an enigma. Cold, unattainable, powerful, but somehow unshakably loyal to her. Back at the northern estate, the frost on the windows mirrored the quiet between them. Noel returned to his usual routine: early strategy meetings, reviewing border patrol reports, training with his soldiers in the snow-covered yard. But something had shifted. He still rarely smiled, still spoke in clipped, efficient sentences. Yet Aralyn began to notice small changes. The way he poured her tea before his own. The way he paused beside her chair during briefings, waiting for her thoughts. The way his gaze lingered just a second longer when she entered the room. She didn't dare name it. Not hope. Not affection. Just change. Meanwhile, in the capital, Rael's fury boiled beneath a porcelain mask. Her plan had failed. She had expected Aralyn to crumble at the sight of her old fiancé. She had expected Noel to be like the rest, drawn to Rael's delicate looks, her practiced innocence. Instead, she had been rejected. Publicly. Twice. And worse, the nobles had noticed. Now, instead of sympathizing with her, they watched her with skeptical eyes. Their whispers had turned sharp. Didn't she steal her sister's betrothed? Maybe the wrong sister was cast aside. Rael couldn't tolerate it. She needed to take something back, to humiliate Aralyn, to remind everyone who the true leading lady of the Empire was. So she schemed. She whispered poison into court ears, that Aralyn's marriage was a sham, that the Duke of the North would never love a woman like her, that she, Rael, was the true match for power. But every word she spread seemed to bounce off the stone walls of Noel's loyalty, and Aralyn was not crumbling. One morning, as snow fell in soft, silent curtains beyond the window, Aralyn walked into the strategy room holding a tray of coffee for the generals. She had started doing it not out of duty, but out of choice, a small act of warmth in a place built for Cold War. Noel looked up from the map. Their eyes met, and something flickered there. Not longing, not quite yet, but respect, and perhaps something waiting to bloom beneath it. That evening, Aralyn found an envelope on her writing desk. No seal, no handwriting she recognized. Inside, only one sentence. Even the quietest winter gives way to spring. She read it once, twice, and then, strangely, unexpectedly, smiled. Rael knew how to destroy reputations. She had perfected the art of whispers, tears, and carefully timed encounters since she was a child. So when her attempts to seduce the Duke failed and her circle of influence began to shrink, she turned to something far more dangerous than charm. Public humiliation. If Aralyn would not bend, then she would be broken. The stage was the winter solstice ball, an imperial tradition, where every noble house paid homage to the emperor and empress. It was a parade of influence and grace, but behind the velvet and music, daggers of gossip were always being sharpened. It was also Aralyn's first major appearance as a duchess. Perfect for a scandal, Rael worked quickly, bribed a servant here, planted rumors there, and arranged for Aralyn's dress to be identical in color and style to the Empress's ceremonial gown. Then came the forged letter, carefully slipped into the hands of court gossips, claiming Aralyn had insulted the Empress and referred to herself as the true queen of the ballroom. A lie. But lies told in candlelight, between champagne and envy, could light empires on fire. Aralyn entered the ballroom in an elegant midnight blue gown, simple yet regal. But the moment the crowd saw the Empress, dressed in the exact same color, the room fell into a stunned silence. Gasps, eyes darting, smirks forming, and then the whispers began. She's mocking the Empress, trying to outshine her at her own ball. Who does the new Duchess think she is? Aralyn's smile faltered. She hadn't meant any offense. Her gown was chosen weeks ago, but now it looked like a calculated insult. And then, the letter, read aloud behind a fan, passed between noblewomen like wildfire. I'll take the throne of admiration soon enough. Let the Empress enjoy her last season as the star. Every word a fabrication. But poison didn't need to be true. It only needed to be whispered. The silence. The ballroom froze. The Empress stood tall, but her expression was unreadable. She hadn't spoken, but her silence alone made the scandal feel real. Aralyn opened her mouth to defend herself, but no words came. And Rael? Rael stood by the columns, eyes shining with triumph, looking every inch the sweet younger sister. Except Aralyn knew better now. "Then I will speak." A deep voice shattered the stillness. "Noel." He entered the ballroom with snow still clinging to his coat, his expression carved from stone. He walked directly to Aralyn, without hesitation, and addressed the room. "If the court has gone deaf to reason, allow me to shout the truth." Gasps. Everyone turned. Noel held up a second letter, the original, the real note he'd received from an anonymous informant warning him of the plot. The investigation had led him straight to Rael's handmaid, and through her, to Rael herself. He laid it bare, publicly. The dress sabotage, the bribes, the forged letter. Rael's face drained of color. A single protest left her lips and was swallowed by the silence. Noel turned to Aralyn, softer now. "I married you under a contract," he said, "but I never agreed to stay silent while your name was dragged through filth." He stepped forward, the crowd parting around him. "You were used, betrayed, painted as a villain, when you were the only one who ever stayed kind." He took her hand, warm and firm. "So, if you'll allow it," he said, voice rough, "I'd like to make that contract permanent, and in front of nobles, empress, and every whispering tongue in the empire." He kissed her. A kiss not of performance, but of truth. A kiss that made the gossip grind to a halt. A kiss that said, she is not alone anymore. For a long moment, Aralyn could hear nothing but her own heartbeat. It was a blur. The gasps of the nobles, the sound of her name spoken in reverence rather than ridicule, the warmth of Noel's hand in hers. She had stood on the precipice of humiliation and instead been lifted, not as a victim, but as someone worth defending. She had never been defended before. Not by her father, not by her so-called fiancé, not even by herself. So when Noel kissed her, she didn't resist, not out of duty, not even out of shock, but because, for the first time in her life, someone was proud to stand beside her. And she wanted to remember what that felt like. Once the ballroom slowly resumed its rhythm, and the whispers had been replaced by cautious curiosity and a new respect for the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn, Aralyn asked Noel for a moment alone. They stepped onto a side balcony, moonlight casting silver shadows on her shoulders. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, eyes focused on the distant stars. "Yes, I did," Noel replied. "Not because of the contract, but because I refused to let you keep being used as someone's stepping stone." Aralyn turned toward him. "You really meant what you said back there, about making it permanent?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "Only if you want to." For a man known as cold and unreadable, he looked anything but. "I've lived in shadows," she whispered. "I was ready to disappear entirely. But with you..." She paused. "I feel like I finally belong somewhere." Noel didn't speak. He just reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, as if sealing that promise in silence. A visit from the Empress. The next morning, before dawn had fully broken over the capital, Aralyn received an unexpected visitor. She arrived alone, dressed in a cloak the color of fog, with no guards and no fanfare, only a steady, curious gaze. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward a chair in Aralyn's receiving room. "Of course, Your Majesty," Aralyn replied, her heart pounding. The Empress studied her for a moment. "You handled last night well." "I didn't do much," Aralyn admitted. Noel made a statement. "But you?" The Empress leaned forward. "You stood your ground, even before anyone stood with you. That is the strength of someone who deserves the Empire's respect." Aralyn blinked, unsure how to respond. "I've seen too many women raised to be ornaments or weapons," the Empress said, rising. "But I think you might be something else entirely." "What's that?" The Empress gave her a small smile. "A choice." And with that, she left, her approval not shouted, but felt. Later that afternoon, Aralyn walked through the winter gardens of the duchy with Noel beside her. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't flinching at compliments or anticipating betrayal. And when she laughed, truly laughed, it startled her so much that she stopped mid-step. Noel turned, his brow raised. "Are you all right?" She smiled at him wide and free. "I forgot what this felt like." "What?" "To be happy. To not owe anyone an explanation." He stepped closer and offered her his hand. "Then let's build a life where that feeling stays." Years passed, seasons changed, wars faded into memory, and names that once filled gossip columns were long forgotten. But the name Aralyn of Blackthorn remained, whispered in court, not as a scandal, but as a symbol of grace under fire, of quiet rebellion, of a woman who chose herself, and in doing so, taught others to do the same. She became a duchess in her own right. The Duchy of Blackthorn, once a cold and desolate place of snowstorms and beasts, became known for its schools, its artists, and the healing sanctuaries Aralyn herself designed. People traveled for weeks just to walk the wildflower paths she had planted with her own hands. A garden grown not from wealth, but from survival. When nobles asked how she managed such transformation, her answer was always the same. "I gave others what I once needed most: shelter, dignity, and the space to choose." She never used the word revenge, but in every act of kindness, in every life she changed, it echoed. Her marriage to Duke Noel Criston had started in duty, passed through fire, and emerged something entirely different. It wasn't perfect. Noel was still stoic. Aralyn still carried scars. But they had found something most nobles never did: partnership. They worked side by side, co-ruling the North, raising standards, and later, raising children. Their daughter, a bold, bright girl with her mother's eyes and her father's quiet strength, once asked, "Mama, were you always this powerful?" Aralyn laughed and replied, "No, I had to become it. One choice at a time." Somewhere in a locked drawer, buried beneath old ribbons and torn invitations, lay a letter with a name she hadn't spoken in years: Rael. It was never opened. Some wounds don't need closure, only distance. Aralyn never saw her again, and she never looked back. And the wildflowers? They still bloomed every year, even in winter, even in the cold, because like her, they had learned to grow from stone and silence. And to anyone who walked those paths now and asked, "Who planted all this beauty in a place once so barren?" the answer would come simply: a woman who stopped sacrificing her life for others and finally chose to live.